Chapter 1. The Disguise. In the kingdom of Lorien, where the power of alphas, betas, and omegas shaped the lives of all, an alpha named Kairos Valen found himself in a difficult situation. His younger brother, Leander, an omega, had run away from an arranged marriage that would have secured their family's alliance with a powerful noble house. The scandal threatened to ruin the Valen family's name, and Kairos was forced rather than determined to protect it, no matter the cost. The only way to salvage the situation was to take Leander's place and marry General Auric Blackthorn, one of the most powerful and respected alphas in the kingdom. Auric's reputation for being ruthless in battle and being called a war god by everyone and commanding in the court made him a figure both feared and admired, and his marriage to an omega was seen as the final step in solidifying his power. No one would suspect that Kairos, the eldest son, would disguise himself as an omega to marry Auric. But Kairos was no stranger to the game of appearances. He had spent his life playing by society's rules that often forced alphas like him to suppress their true selves in favor of power, control, and respect. Now he would take on the ultimate deception, pretending to be an omega for the sake of his family's future. On the day of the wedding, dressed in a flowing gown of pale blue that signified the omega status, Kairos stood before the gathered court. His heart raced, not from fear of the ceremony itself, but from the knowledge that this was all a lie. He could already sense the eyes of the guests watching him carefully, waiting for a slip in his performance, but with a calm face he played the part. His instincts as an alpha fighting to break free with every step. And then there was Auric. The general was everything Kairos had expected. Tall, imposing, with a gaze that could pierce through any illusion. He stood at the altar with a stoic expression, his eyes never wavering from Kairos, as if sensing that something was off. But Kairos held his composure, nodding politely as they exchanged vows. In the end, it wasn't love that bound them. It was duty, both to their families and the kingdom. That night, as they retreated to their new chambers, Kairos felt the weight of what he had done. The deception was only beginning. He knew Auric would soon see through the mask. And when that happened, there was no telling how the general would react, but for now, all he had to do was play his part until it was no longer necessary. As they stood in the candlelit room, Auric's deep voice broke the silence. "You're different from what I expected, Kairos." A small smile tugged at Kairos's lips. "And what did you expect?" "Someone more fragile," Auric replied, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I suppose the rumors were wrong." Kairos, knowing the time had come to begin testing the waters, took a step closer, his fingers gently brushing the back of Auric's neck. His voice dropped to a teasing whisper. "How about I give you a child? Do you prefer little alphas or little omegas?" Auric's expression hardened, but he said nothing, the tension in the room palpable. Kairos could see the flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, pass through Auric's eyes. For now it was a game. But soon Kairos knew it would no longer be a game. Soon Auric would find out the truth and everything would change. Chapter 2. The Tease. Kairos awoke the next morning to the faint sounds of the castle coming alive. Servants bustled in the halls, and the soft glow of dawn spilled through the heavy curtains of his chambers. For a moment he had forgotten the weight of the previous day, forgotten that he was now Omega Kairos, wife to General Auric Blackthorn. The thought made him smirk bitterly. He had pulled off the first step of his deception, but it was only the beginning. If Auric suspected anything, he didn't show it, maintaining the same stoic demeanor throughout their sparse interactions during the wedding day. However, Kairos knew he couldn't let his guard down. Breakfast with the general was a formal affair. The dining hall was grand, but the atmosphere was stiff. Kairos sat across from Auric, delicately picking at his food. Auric remained silent, focused on his plate, his sharp eyes occasionally flicking toward Kairos. Breaking the silence, Kairos leaned forward with an exaggerated sweetness in his voice. "You're awfully quiet, General. Shouldn't a husband and wife get to know each other better?" Auric raised an eyebrow, clearly unamused. "I'm not one for idle chatter. I value peace and efficiency." Kairos tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Peace and efficiency sounds like a lonely life. Maybe I can make things more interesting for you." Auric's fork paused mid-air, but he didn't respond. Kairos took that as his cue to push further. If he could annoy the general enough, perhaps he'd be dismissed entirely. Later that day, Kairos decided to turn up the charm. He found Auric in the training grounds, sparring with soldiers. The general was a sight to behold. His movements were precise, calculated, and powerful. Kairos couldn't deny the allure of the man's physicality, but he quickly shook off the thought. This wasn't about attraction, it was about survival. When the session ended, Kairos approached, his steps deliberately light and playful. "Impressive," he said, his tone laced with mock admiration. "Though I suppose a man of your stature would be." Arik wiped the sweat from his brow, his gaze meeting Kairos's with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, just watching my husband in action," Kairos replied with a sly smile. "You're quite the warrior, aren't you? Strong, commanding, the perfect alpha." Arik's jaw tightened. "You don't need to flatter me." Kairos stepped closer, his voice dropping to a teasing whisper. "Who said I was flattering? I'm simply stating facts, and perhaps—" He leaned in just enough to invade Arik's personal space. "Perhaps I'm considering how those strengths might translate elsewhere." Arik froze, his eyes narrowing. Kairos could see the flicker of irritation, but also curiosity in his expression. "What are you playing at?" Arik asked, his tone dangerously low. Kairos chuckled, stepping back with a shrug. "Just trying to make this marriage a little less boring. After all, don't couples usually discuss children at this point? Tell me, General, would you prefer little alphas running around or darling little omegas? Or perhaps both?" Arik's fists clenched, but he said nothing. His silence was enough to satisfy Kairos. He had planted the seed of discomfort, and now all he had to do was wait for it to grow. As Kairos walked away, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. The game he was playing was dangerous, and Arik was not a man to be trifled with. Yet despite the risk, he couldn't back down. If he succeeded, he would be free. But deep down, Kairos couldn't shake the feeling that Arik was watching him closely, not with anger, but with something far more complicated. Chapter 3: The Unraveling of Lies. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, and the strange rhythm of Kairos and Arik's relationship continued. Arik remained stoic and distant, but his sharp eyes always seemed to follow Kairos, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. Meanwhile, Kairos kept up his teasing and playful antics, hoping to provoke the general into despising him. However, the tension between them only grew thicker. Kairos began to notice subtle changes in Arik's behavior, his gaze lingering longer, his voice softening ever so slightly in their rare conversations. It was unsettling. The general wasn't supposed to care. But Kairos had bigger problems to worry about. His disguise as an Omega was starting to falter. Despite his careful planning, small mistakes crept in. His overly confident demeanor, the way he moved, and even his scent, which the suppressants couldn't fully mask. The breaking point came one evening during a formal dinner with visiting nobles. Kairos had been seated beside Arik, their chairs uncomfortably close. The general's hand brushed his as they reached for the same wine goblet. Kairos froze, a wave of unease washing over him. He forced a laugh, pulling his hand away. "Careful, General. You might make me think you're warming up to me." Arik said nothing, but his eyes narrowed. Later that night, as they returned to their chambers, Arik's mood seemed darker than usual. Kairos could feel the weight of his stare as they entered the room. "Enough," Arik finally said, his voice low but sharp. Kairos turned to him, feigning innocence. "Enough of what?" "Of this game you're playing," Arik said, stepping closer. "You think I haven't noticed? The way you carry yourself, the way you speak, it's not like any Omega I've ever met. And your scent—" He paused, his piercing eyes locking onto Kairos. "Your scent is wrong." Kairos's heart raced, but he forced a smirk. "Perhaps your sense of smell isn't as sharp as you think, General." Arik's patience snapped. In one swift move, he grabbed Kairos by the wrist, his grip firm but not painful. "Who are you really, Kairos? Tell me the truth." For the first time, Kairos felt truly cornered. He had always known this moment would come, but he hadn't expected it to be so soon. His instincts screamed at him to lie, to fight back, but something about the intensity in Arik's gaze made him pause. Finally, with a deep breath, Kairos pulled his wrist free and stepped back. "Fine," he said, his voice colder than usual. "You want the truth? I'm not an Omega, I'm an Alpha." Arik's eyes widened, the realization hitting him like a blow. He took a step back, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. "An Alpha," he echoed, his voice low and dangerous. Kairos lifted his chin defiantly. "Yes, my brother Leander ran away from this marriage, and I took his place to protect my family. I never wanted this. And I certainly didn't want you." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, Arik said nothing, his gaze locked on Kairos. Then, without warning, he moved toward the door and locked it with a click that echoed in the silent room. Kairos tensed, his heart pounding. "What are you doing?" Arik turned back to him, his expression unreadable. "Didn't you say you'd give me little Alpha and little Omega, child?" His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Let's see you do it now." Kairos's breath hitched, his mind racing. "You're insane," he spat. "Am I?" Arik asked, stepping closer. "You lied to me, deceived me in front of the entire kingdom. You made a mockery of our vows. And yet here we are." His eyes softened, just barely, as he added, "You're still mine, Kairos. No matter what you are, Alpha or Omega, it doesn't matter." Kairos backed away until his knees hit the edge of the bed. "You can't possibly mean—" Arik cut him off. "I mean every word." The room was thick with tension as the two alphas faced each other, neither willing to back down. Kairos had spent his life hiding behind masks, but now, stripped of his lies, he felt exposed in a way he never had before. For the first time, he saw something in Arik's eyes that wasn't anger or coldness. It was desire, raw and unrelenting. And as much as he wanted to fight it, Kairos felt something stir within himself, too. The walls between them had finally crumbled, and neither of them knew what would come next. Chapter 4. The Awakening. Kairos stood frozen, his back against the edge of the bed as Arik's words echoed in his ears. He had expected fury, rejection, perhaps even a public spectacle to expose his lies, but this raw intensity, this unrelenting claim, was something he hadn't anticipated. "You're serious," Kairos said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. Arik stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over Kairos. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Kairos's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "And what do you think will happen, Arik? You'll keep me locked up? Force me to submit? And we'll live happily ever after?" Arik didn't flinch. "I don't care what the world thinks anymore. You walked into my life and turned it upside down, Kairos. You lied, but you also intrigued me. You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for. Stronger than you admit to yourself. And yes, you're mine." Kairos's breath caught in his throat. The word struck a nerve, peeling back layers of armor he hadn't realized he still wore. For a moment, he saw something raw and vulnerable in Arik's eyes, something that mirrored the fear and longing he'd kept buried deep inside. "What are you doing to me, Arik?" Kairos whispered, his voice barely audible. Arik's gaze softened, his hand lifting to brush against Kairos's cheek. "The same thing you've done to me." For the first time, Kairos didn't pull away. The touch was gentle, hesitant, as though Arik was giving him a choice. It was a stark contrast to the cold, commanding general he had married. "I didn't want this," Kairos admitted, his voice shaking. "I didn't want you." "And yet here we are," Arik replied. "Neither of us asked for this, Kairos, but we have it. The question is, what do we do with it?" Kairos looked into Arik's eyes, searching for deceit, for any sign that this was just another ploy. But all he found was sincerity. Against his better judgment, a part of him wanted to believe it. "Why?" Kairos asked. "Why not cast me out? Expose me for what I am?" Arik's jaw tightened, and he stepped even closer, his voice a low rumble. "Because I've already fallen for you." The admission hit Kairos like a blow, stripping away the last of his defenses. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How could someone like Arik, someone who thrived on control and power, fall for a man who had deceived him so thoroughly? And yet, deep down, Kairos felt the same pull. Despite everything, he couldn't deny the connection between them. The way Arik's presence seemed to fill the empty spaces he hadn't even realized were there. For the first time, Kairos let himself be vulnerable. He reached out, his fingers brushing against Arik's hand. "If we do this, there's no turning back." Arik nodded, his eyes never leaving Kairos's. "I don't want to turn back." Their lips met in a fierce, desperate kiss, a culmination of weeks and months of tension and unspoken emotions. It was a kiss that spoke of anger, forgiveness, and a longing neither of them fully understood. As the night stretched on, the walls between them crumbled completely. They shared not just their bodies, but their fears, their hopes, and their truths. For the first time, Kairos felt seen, not as an Omega or an Alpha, but as himself. By the time dawn broke, Kairos lay in Arik's arms, his head resting on the general's chest. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. But as he drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in his mind. This was only the beginning. The world would soon come for them, and they would have to face it together. Chapter 5. The Turn of Fate. The days following their night of surrender were unlike anything Kairos had imagined. The icy distance between him and Arik melted, replaced by a tentative understanding. They no longer avoided each other or tiptoed around the truth. For the first time, Kairos felt as if they were partners rather than adversaries. But the outside world was less forgiving. Whispers began to circulate about the odd dynamic between the general and his spouse. Arik's refusal to host the usual public appearances, combined with Kairos's increasingly confident demeanor, raised eyebrows among the nobles. The tension finally came to a head during a council meeting. Arik had left Kairos in their chambers, promising to return quickly, but Kairos couldn't ignore the creeping sense of unease. Something was off. When a servant delivered a cryptic message warning him of a plot against Arik, Kairos knew he couldn't stay hidden any longer. Dressed simply to avoid recognition, Kairos made his way to the council chambers. As he approached, he heard raised voices, accusations and threats. "You've become weak, General," one noble spat. "Your Omega has made a mockery of your position. How can we trust a man who's been deceived so easily?" Arik's voice was calm but firm. "You question my strength because of my spouse? My loyalty to this kingdom has never wavered. If you doubt me, you're welcome to challenge me." Kairos pushed open the doors, his entrance drawing startled gasps from the room. "Challenge you? Over me? How bold of them." Arik's eyes widened, slightly in surprise, but he quickly masked it. "Kairos, you shouldn't be here." "And yet I am," Kairos said, stepping forward. His gaze swept over the council members, his posture regal despite his plain attire. "You question the general's strength because of me? Then let me make this clear. I am not the weak, timid Omega you expected. I am Kairos Valen, an Alpha. I took my brother's place to protect my family and this kingdom." The room erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted, some in outrage, others in shock. Arik raised a hand, silencing them all. "You admit to your deception," one noble sneered. "Then why should we believe anything you say?" "Because I have nothing to gain from lying now," Kairos replied, his voice steady. "And because whether you like it or not, I am still the general's spouse. You can try to strip him of his position, but you'll find that Arik Blackthorn's strength doesn't rely on the opinions of cowards." Arik smirked, a hint of pride in his expression. He stepped beside Kairos, his hand resting protectively on his shoulder. "You heard him. If anyone here wishes to challenge me, now's the time. Otherwise, this discussion is over." No one dared to speak. As the council reluctantly dispersed, Arik and Kairos returned to their chambers. Once the doors closed, Arik turned to Kairos, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that." Kairos shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Someone had to put them in their place. Besides, isn't that what partners do? Protect each other?" Arik studied him for a moment before pulling him into a tight embrace. "You're incredible, you know that?" Kairos chuckled, leaning into the warmth of Arik's arms. "I've been told." But as the tension of the day faded, Kairos began to notice something strange. His body felt different, off in a way he couldn't explain. Dismissing it as exhaustion, he resolved to rest and recover. Weeks later, a healer confirmed what Kairos had suspected, but refused to believe he was pregnant. "You're certain?" Kairos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The healer nodded. "It's rare but not impossible for an alpha to conceive under certain conditions. The child is strong, and so are you." When Kairos told Arik, the general's reaction was nothing like what he'd expected. Instead of shock or disbelief, Arik's face softened, a rare smile spreading across his lips. "A child," Arik said, his voice filled with wonder. "Our child." Kairos hesitated, emotions warring within him. "This wasn't part of the plan," he admitted. "Plans change," Arik replied, pulling him close. "But if this is our fate, I'll protect you both with everything I have." For the first time in a long while, Kairos felt truly safe. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. Their story was far from over, but in that moment, he allowed himself to believe in a future filled with hope, love, and family. Chapter 6. A Future Together. Months passed, and the palace atmosphere shifted as the news of Kairos's pregnancy spread. The revelation was met with disbelief and confusion. An alpha pregnant? It was unheard of, a phenomenon that defied the natural order. But despite the whispers and speculation, the bond between Kairos and Arik only grew stronger. Arik became fiercely protective, ensuring Kairos was cared for at every turn. He adjusted his duties to spend more time with him, guiding him through the complexities of his condition. Kairos, who had spent most of his life relying on no one but himself, found it both frustrating and endearing. One evening, as Kairos sat on the balcony of their chambers, cradling his growing belly, Arik joined him, a rare softness in his expression. "You're staring again," Kairos teased, though his voice held no edge. Arik chuckled, sitting beside him. "Can you blame me? You're glowing, Kairos." Kairos rolled his eyes, though a faint blush crept up his cheeks. "I'm not some fragile flower, Arik." "I know," Arik replied, taking his hand. "You're the strongest person I know, but even the strong need someone to lean on." Kairos looked at him, the vulnerability in Arik's eyes matching his own. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad it's you." Arik smiled, his grip tightening slightly. "And I'm glad it's you." The birth of a new era. The day their child arrived was both chaotic and miraculous. Kairos had insisted on walking to the healer's chambers himself when the contractions began, refusing to be carried despite Arik's protests. Hours later, as the cries of their newborn filled the room, Kairos and Arik gazed down at the tiny bundle in awe. The child had Kairos's sharp features, but Arik's piercing eyes, a perfect blend of the two. "A boy," the healer announced, "strong and healthy." Kairos, exhausted but overjoyed, cradled his son, his heart swelling with a love he hadn't known was possible. Arik sat beside him, his hand resting on Kairos's shoulder, as he looked at their child with pride and wonder. "What should we name him?" Kairos asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Arik thought for a moment before meeting Kairos's gaze. "Arian. It means new dawn." Kairos smiled, nodding. "Arian Blackthorn. It's perfect. A new beginning." As time passed, the kingdom began to accept the unconventional family. Kairos's strength and resilience won over even the most skeptical nobles, and Arik's unwavering devotion to both Kairos and their son silenced any lingering doubts. Arian grew into a curious, spirited child, adored by both his parents. Together, Kairos and Arik taught him the values of courage, honesty, and love, determined to give him a future free of the burdens they had once carried. One evening, as the three of them sat together in the gardens, Arian playing with a wooden sword. While Kairos and Arik watched, Kairos leaned into Arik's side, a contented smile on his face. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Kairos asked, his tone light but thoughtful. Arik chuckled, wrapping an arm around him. "Every day, and I wouldn't change a thing." Kairos glanced at him, his eyes soft. "Neither would I." Their journey had been fraught with challenges, but in the end, they had found something neither of them had expected. A home, a family, and a love that defied all odds. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the gardens, Kairos and Arik knew that their story was only just beginning. Together they would face whatever the future held, their bond unbreakable, their hearts full. Epilogue: A Legacy of Love. 5 years had passed since Arian's birth, and the Blackthorn estate thrived under the unity and strength of its leaders. Arik had remained a steadfast general, his reputation bolstered by his unwavering love and devotion to his unconventional family. Kairos, now fully accepted in his role as Arik's spouse, had become a figure of admiration among the nobles for his wit, wisdom, and undeniable strength. Their son Arian was a curious blend of both his parents. At just 5 years old, he displayed the commanding presence of an alpha, but with a gentle, empathetic spirit that Kairos recognized as his own. The kingdom marveled at the boy who, despite his alpha status, treated everyone with kindness and fairness. Arian was a symbol of the new era his parents had ushered in, a union that defied societal norms and expectations. One crisp autumn morning, as the family enjoyed breakfast in the garden, Arian darted around the table, wooden sword in hand. "Father, watch me!" he exclaimed, swinging the sword in a dramatic arc. Arik chuckled, his eyes filled with pride. "You'll make a fine warrior one day, Arian." But remember, strength isn't just in your sword arm. It's in your heart. Kairos smirked, sipping his tea. And let's not forget strategy. You can't just charge in like your father does. Sometimes brains beat brawn. Arik raised an eyebrow, feigning offense. Brains and brawn are a perfect combination, wouldn't you agree? Kairos leaned closer, a playful glint in his eyes. Perhaps, but I've yet to see you use your brains in a fight. Arian laughed, oblivious to the teasing. I'll be like both of you, strong and smart. Kairos reached out to ruffle his son's hair. That's my boy. Another miracle. As the seasons turned, Kairos began to notice familiar signs: nausea, exhaustion, and a subtle shift in his body's balance. At first, he dismissed it as stress, but as weeks passed, he could no longer ignore the truth. A visit to the healer confirmed what he had suspected. He was pregnant again. When he told Arik, the general's reaction was even more emotional than the first time. Arik pulled Kairos into a tight embrace, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Another child, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You've given me more than I ever dreamed possible. Kairos, though nervous about facing another pregnancy, found himself smiling. I suppose I'm just full of surprises. Arian was ecstatic at the news, already proclaiming himself the best big brother in the kingdom. He followed Kairos around, asking endless questions about the baby, and declaring that he would teach his sibling everything he knew. A future of possibilities. Months later, on a cold winter's night, Kairos gave birth to their second child, a delicate, wide-eyed baby with Arik's sharp jawline and Kairos' inquisitive gaze. The healer examined the newborn carefully before smiling. An enigma, she announced. Kairos blinked in surprise. An enigma. The healer nodded. It's a rare gift, one that symbolizes balance. They are a very rare breed. Alphas born only 5 out of 1,000 babies. Kairos and Arik exchanged a glance, understanding the significance. Their child was a true reflection of their bond, a bridge between two worlds. A child born from 2 alpha fathers. A true miracle in every sense. What should we name him? Kairos asked, cradling the baby in his arms. Arik smiled, leaning over to kiss Kairos' forehead. Eris, it means harmony. Kairos nodded, the name feeling right. Eris Blackthorn, welcome to the family. The dawn of a new era. With Arian and Eris by their side, Kairos and Arik looked toward the future with hope and determination. Their family was unconventional, their journey far from ordinary, but they had proven that love and resilience could overcome any obstacle. As they stood together on the balcony of their chambers, the 2 children playing at their feet, Kairos rested his head against Arik's shoulder. Do you think they'll be ready for what the world throws at them? Kairos asked softly. Arik wrapped an arm around him, his gaze steady. If they're anything like us, they'll be more than ready. They'll thrive. Kairos smiled, his heart full. Then let's make sure they have the best world possible. As the stars glittered above them, the Blackthorn family stood united, a beacon of strength, love, and the promise of a brighter future.